Our postdoctoral research fellow at Trinity as well. And their presentation is Preserving Past Together, Reflections on the Easter Rising 1916 Web Archive. So, John.
Testing. Hello everyone. I think this really is the graveyard shift, so thanks for hanging around. I'm conscious that there's a train for Dublin departing very soon, so I'm very grateful you've all stayed around. I'm going to be talking about a 1916 project, and I'm conscious that maybe we're all a bit 1916 now at this point. It's been a year of tremendous commemorations. So myself and Brendan got involved in this project, which we've rather grandly titled Preserving Our Past Together, Reflections on the Easter Rising 1916 Web Archive. So this is pretty much what we'll be exploring. I'll be talking a little bit about the background, the planning, and the access issues, and then Brendan will talk a little bit more about the process of curation. We have lots of nice screenshots, and he'll also talk about some permissions issues that arose, and also the exhibition that we organised in tandem with Oxford. So basically, I'm doing the kind of boring procedural slides, and he's going to do all the cool, funky stuff after me. So, so I'll just kick off. So what is the background of this project? Well, I guess we need to flip back to 2013, when the Legal Deposit Library's non-print works regulations were implemented in the UK. So basically, this extended the existing legal deposit framework to new formats, electronic formats, ebooks, e-journals, and crucially in the context of this project, websites, the .uk domain itself. For those of you unfamiliar, there are 6 core legal deposit libraries, ourselves, Oxford and Cambridge, and also the National Libraries of Wales and Scotland and the British Library. Of course, it's unusual for an Irish university to have this entitlement, and I've heard it described as an historical anomaly, but it's a very happy historical anomaly for Trinity. And we were very lucky that electronic legal deposit was also extended to us in a real act of collegiality on behalf of our colleagues in the UK. So the Web Archive is phenomenal, opened up huge possibilities in terms of development of new special collections. And basically, as someone remarked yesterday, a lot of these collaborative projects start with a conversation, and that's literally what happened in this instance. In 2014, at the annual meeting of the Legal Deposit Librarians Annual Conference, people started to discuss the archive and what we could do with it. And Katrina Cannon in Oxford and Helen Hooks-Hugh, who was then head of archiving, who's now part of the Internet Archive, they were the initial champions, and they were keen to exploit the potential of the Web Archive, because in itself it's massive, but you can actually create subject-based themed collections within the archive itself, and that's another path to discovery for the researchers, and that was something that we thought we could do something with 1916 and build a targeted archive around that. So the conversations continued. My colleague Margaret Flood ran with it, and Susan Thomas ran with it in Oxford, and we just kept having conversations, and we had lots of those dreaded teleconferences that librarians are very partial to, and we sort of brainstormed, and we realised that we needed to broaden out the scope of the project. We felt it made sense that we would cover both dimensions of the 1916 event. So basically that we would have the UK perspective and the Irish perspective. We thrashed out the scheme and the scope and the parameters of the of the collection. And crucially, we broke the workload down into two sections. In Trinity, we decided we'd focus on archiving Irish websites, and the UK would focus on the .uk domain. And I guess what I should point out is if you decide to do a themed collection, you have to make a formal submission to the British Library, where you submit a document where you list all the terms and parameters and the time frame for the project. And so we did that, and in doing that, we really had to focus on what kind of material that we wanted to harvest. So you'll see here we have 4 categories, and they're pretty broad in scope. You know, sites relating to 1916 itself, resources about the history of the event, critical and political reflection on the significance of the Rising, and academic sites on the meaning of the 1916 Rising in modern memory. So a pretty broad perspective, in fairness. But we were very keen to get scholarly material with digitized primary resources. So we're very keen to make it a really valuable historical archive. It's one thing deciding to do something, it's another thing trying to get the manpower and the funding to do it. So we just kept the discussions going. We did another thing that librarians are very fond of. We formed a committee. We're very good at collaboration, and we're also very fond of forming committees, and there are many committees associated with legal deposit. Within Trinity, in my own department, I'm a history cataloguer, so myself and Margaret Flood, we got together and formed a little group. And for me as a cataloguer, this was very interesting. This was something done on top of my day job, and it was instructive for me that sometimes you just have to run with it, and it was a fun project to do, but it was work as well. But we persisted, and we got great support from the librarian. And we got some funding internally, which allowed us to appoint a postdoc for 4 months on a part-time basis. And happily, we were able to recruit Brendan, who actually has a PhD in Irish history. So it all worked out very well because he was working on staff at the time. And once we had that in place, the funding, the project got up and running, and we began the process of engagement. We talked to our colleagues in the National Library, who of course have been web archiving with the Internet Memory Foundation for a number of years, so we were able to learn from them. We spoke to academics in the School of History. Why not ask them, get them to tell us what websites they're using? And of course, we liaised with our colleagues in research collections who were maintaining a rather excellent blog called Changed Utterly, and they gave us a few pointers as well. From the perspective of Oxford, they got momentum a little bit more quickly, and they were able to recruit some student interns over the summer of 2015. They worked on the project over the summer, and they were a little bit ahead of us in terms of the whole process of curation. But there was a lot of excitement within Oxford because they had some physical materials which they were very keen to display. They also liaised with their own history faculty. They liaised with the Irish Embassy. There was a big launch, and they also developed a physical exhibition as well, which we did as well, but we were slightly out of sync with each other, which is one of the challenges of working on a project where you're geographically distributed. But we got there in the end, and they were very enthusiastic, and we sort of jockeyed each other along, especially when we hit the odd road bump, but it all came together in the end. So just to continue, I just want to give a brief shout out to the Web Archive, because that's really what facilitated this project. The Web Archive is massive, and so it was really important for us to develop a themed-based approach to give researchers a way into this, and the 1916 is just one of many themed collections. Since the legislation was passed, the British Library have been doing regular domain crawls of the .uk world. So far, they've harvested over 10 million registered domains. In the first year, they took in 30 terabytes of data. In 2014, they took in 60 terabytes of data. It's just growing exponentially. And it's not just .uk, it's any website which is registered in the UK, .com, .org. Jurisdiction and territoriality is a very vexed issue within the world of web archiving. It's very carefully framed in UK legislation, and something we might be mindful in Ireland of when we go to frame this legislation ourselves. And they've been incredibly collegial in sharing their knowledge and expertise. As I say, this is just this is a little screenshot of the digital curation tool. I should say that the British Library organised a day's training for myself and Brendan last November. They were very happy to share their expertise. They've been doing archiving on a voluntary basis since the early noughties, so they know an awful lot about web archiving. And they've developed some very intuitive tools, and this is their curation tool, the W3 Act tool. It's very, very straightforward. You can sort of see there's a whole list of collections there. Easter Rising is about halfway down. It's a very straightforward tool to use, and for anyone who's of a cataloguing bent, I've just briefly have a slide of metadata because that's a topic close to my heart. They use very basic metadata, descriptive metadata. It's basically qualified Dublin core with 16 core elements. For me as a cataloger, it's kind of shocking that they don't use shocking to me, they don't use a content standard. There's no authority control. They use very basic keyword lists. There's no extensive controlled vocabularies. But we're dealing with data on such a scale that the traditional library approach to detailed, painfully acquired resource description really isn't feasible. In the main domain crawl itself, the amount of data that is taken in is fairly minimal. So that one of the benefits of doing a themed approach is you can expand a little bit on the collection descriptions. So I'll just kick on. Access was a little bit of an issue during the course of the project. I should clarify that the UK Web Archive can only be accessed on the premises of the constituent legal deposit libraries, which is a little bit counterintuitive when you think you're talking about an online resource. So when the collection was launched in February, the British Library very kindly put together a basic web page with links to the various collections, some of which are in the UK Legal Deposit Web Archive with all its access restrictions, some of which are also in UCWA, which is a legacy open access web archive. So the terms are very similar, so it can be a little bit confusing when you're presenting the collection to users. So there's a little snapshot of UCWA. UCWA is undergoing a revamp at the moment, but you can actually go and look at the web archive there at the moment. It's a little bit dated, but as I say, it's been revamped at the moment. Permissions was a contentious issue for us. As the more permissions we obtain, the more content will manifest itself in the open access web archive. Also, just to note, this is just a screenshot of the Legal Deposit web archive itself. It's very much in its first iteration. There's no collection level browse at the moment, but there is a web archive group looking at developing a new discovery layer. The first few years, the British Library, they were just trying really hard to create the technical infrastructure to do the basic domain crawl, which is on a massive scale. Now the focus is on improving discovery. And from our perspective, it's really important that we develop collection level browse, because there's huge potential for us to work with faculty and develop subject-based collections within the web archive itself, which is just so huge that we need more pathways into the resource itself. So that's undergoing a revamp at the moment. And so just to briefly recap on this, in terms of access, we have the Easter Rising Web Archive webpage, which is kind of a stopgap as we were gaining permissions for the websites. There's the Legal Deposit Web Archive. There's no collection level browse at the moment, but that's hopefully going to come on stream this year. And then there's the Legacy Aqua Open Access Web Archive. And that's in development at the moment as well. It's undergoing a revamp. That's all I'm going to say. Brendan's going to talk a little bit more about the process of curation.
Thank you, John. Currently, the collection contains 307 websites, with 99 of these added by Trinity College Library. At present, 40 of these have been permissions cleared, 57 are pending, and these include copyright holders who have agreed in principle to inclusion in the web archive and those from whom we received no response. And 2 organisations did decline to provide permission. This gives us a permission rate of 40%, which is comparable with the experiences of other web archive initiatives in Ireland and the United Kingdom. Permissions-based web archiving is a labour-intensive process with multiple levels of manual input from both the curatorial and the technical aspects. Selecting websites, identifying website owners, and initiating individual contact with each of them, administering the permissions process, setting the crawl parameters, and the frequency of capturing the content of a website, ingesting the data, carrying out quality assurance, and then making it publicly available is a very time-consuming and resource-intensive undertaking. The initial responses to our requests are usually positive, but we have noted that for some, the terms of the licence agreement is a deterring factor due to the restrictions imposed by the UK legislative framework in which we are operating. Within large organisations, there's also the added difficulty of identifying the person who controls the copyright of the content, with many organisations themselves being unsure about who can make such a decision. And ultimately, such barriers hinder our ability to anticipate which digital data will be most valuable to researchers in the future. But despite these challenges, this project has preserved web resources that will enable critical reflection on the Easter Rising and the diverse ways it has been commemorated and engaged with in 2016. Many of these reflections, of course, and debates about the legacy of the Rising will take place in the internet. Commemorative websites, online news media and blogs will be invaluable primary resources of the future for those attempting to analyse how people interpreted and engage with the Rising in its centenary year. For example, traditional newspapers have for some time shared news through multiple platforms, with printed newspaper articles being reproduced online. But web archiving is not only about preserving the digital equivalents of traditional paper archive resources. Online news media has the added function of allowing readers the opportunity to directly comment and debate, revealing information about how content is viewed and shared. Increasingly, news media is being created solely in a digital environment, with the news portals offering alternative sources for information, and again providing a forum for discussions and indicators of how the material is being engaged with. These portals are becoming increasingly sophisticated and have moved from collecting and sharing to increasingly featuring interactive elements, such as this poll asking readers if they will be attending a 1916 event, which garnered over 12,000 responses, or linking to video and photo sharing websites such as this Lego stop motion film, which is a striking example of how children engage with the Rising in its centenary year. The range of websites included also reflects the varied ways in which the British and Irish states, cultural and educational institutions, as well as communities and individuals are approaching the events. We have not only preserved some of the Irish state's effort to provide an inclusive programme of events, but also reflections on the centenary from key individuals such as the Irish Ambassador to Great Britain and the President of Ireland. There are also a range of community sites from both from within Ireland, the UK, but also the United States, and they really reflect the diverse approaches that have been adopted to reflect on the centenary year. And these new media platforms also contain more sophisticated elements, such as these digitised images of watercolours by the playwright Sean O'Casey. And community blogs are an excellent resource in reflecting how people engage with historical events in a time of major transformations in communications. Within Ireland, there's also been a range of creative projects reflecting on the rising through music and theatre, along with artistic responses such as the Sackville Street project, focusing on the deaths of civilians during the rising. These highlight imaginative approaches to how the events are being engaged with throughout this year. So basically, that web archiving offers the opportunity for this diversity to be preserved, and I think consequently provides a much broader picture of the undertakings that can really complement the official commemorative programmes. There are also a range of reflections based on primary source material, which is produced by cultural institutions as well as amateur enthusiasts, which highlights how web archives are an evolving conception of what constitutes archival material, and really requires an awareness of the increasingly significant role that digital technologies are playing in historical research. The Richmond Barracks website focuses on discrete aspects of the Easter Rising, such as the imprisonment of those arrested, but also elements that had for a long time been neglected, such as the role of women. Similarly, websites have been created by family members of those involved in the Rising, which incorporate personal accounts, but also digitised images of primary documents. One of the outputs of this project were 2 exhibitions held at both the University of Oxford and at Trinity College, which comprised both physical and digital elements. We at Trinity held our long room exhibition, which featured exhibits of unique material from our manuscripts and archives research library and the early printed books department. This display traced the methods of recording and reflecting on the Rising from the initial scramble to record the events as they happened in 1916 to the commemorative activity of 1966, through to our current project to capture and preserve the 1916 related websites produced in 2016. Many of these physical items displayed in the exhibition have been digitised and form part of one of our other 1916 related projects, our Changed Utterly blog, a series of weekly blog posts in the year leading up to the centenary based on our archival holdings. The site forms part of the web archive and will ensure that the material that's being created will be digitally preserved. The blog also contains contextual information as well as digitised copies of documents and images. During 1916 itself, a number of people with connections to Trinity had already identified the Easter Rising of historic importance, and a range of material such as this charred postal docket retrieved from the dunes of the GPO have been collected. The scrapbook of Elsie Mahaffey, who was the daughter of Trinity Provost John Pentland Mahaffey, contains insights into life in Trinity during the Rising, as well as stamps, badges and other ephemera that she collected. The blog also showcases Trinity's original copy of the proclamation, as well as material elements such as this casing of a bullet which pierced the roof of the library during Easter week. So what has been produced is primary research which is born in a digital environment and exists in no other format, and it's really material such as this that's most vulnerable from a preservation perspective. The eventual value of this material will of course relate to its content, but also how the material has been preserved and curated. And this blog really allows Trinity to maximise the opportunities which are offered by these new digital platforms to extend the accessibility of our collections, and then and in turn forms part of Trinity College Libraries, their wider strategy to accelerate access to digital content in order to catalyse new avenues of scholarship. The valuable partnership created between the 3 institutions on this project utilises Oxford's curation of the UK domain material, the technical infrastructure and expertise that the British Library has built up over many years, and merges these with the wealth of material that's available in the .ie domain. Collectively, these serve to deepen and strengthen the historic bonds that have always existed between the UK legal deposit libraries, but reimagines these bonds for a digital age. This collaboration demonstrates the potential of web archives to contribute to future research interests as well as teaching and learning, and at present, advocacy will play a major role in advancing any potential legislation. And this requires interested parties to become advocates amongst their peers, raising the profile of web archiving and promoting its advancement. To sum up, the internet has enabled an unprecedented era of knowledge sharing, but it has also created new challenges. The diversity of material that is now exchanged over the World Wide Web really poses a challenge to our understanding of what our cultural heritage consists of. We need to ask, how can we prevent the vast amount of cultural and intellectual content that is available through the medium of the internet from disappearing? How many of the websites we are looking at in this collection will exist even a year from now? Traditional archives consisting of printed material are tangible physical artifacts that have long been considered essential to preserve for posterity. These are now being joined by blogs and online news media, websites dedicated to individuals and organizations, and initiatives by cultural institutions that digitize material, allowing access from anywhere in the world, which really opens up our collections beyond the boundaries of museums and libraries. Academics now reflect on events organized on the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising in 1966 and how these events were framed, and the aspects that were championed and the critical viewpoints that were denied expression. In a similar way, the material that is now in the process of being created will be an essential resource for future researchers in their attempts to analyse how the generations of 2016 engage with the legacy of the Rising. Our reliance on these new media platforms to provide a window into life in the early 21st century will only grow. But their utilisation as a historical source in the future necessitates their preservation today. The manifesto of Trinity College Library emphasises that we have a cultural and intellectual responsibility to create a future library in a time of enormous educational, technological and information changes. This web archive is a demonstration of the power of effective collaboration between legal deposit libraries to enable the curation of new types of collections. And this development of more diverse collaborative networks can facilitate future-facing partnerships that are based on our collective commitment to devise innovative approaches to emerging digital opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Brendan. That was